it is my semi-annual, biannual, whatever the word is, my twice a year rant about daylight savings. Our governments have interfered with our clocks once again, and you know what? We need to stick to one thing or another, right? Again, I've sort of switched on this stuff a little bit. Because I used to be a proponent of switching to this, right? To have the later sunsets, um, and and just sticking in daylight savings time instead of standard time. But I think I like standard time. Again, I'm used to it. I like being able to walk my kid to daycare with the sun fully out. Was a little bit out today, so wasn't too bad. And I get a bunch of other folks who make that criticism too. It's closer to like the natural circadian rhythms that people have. Instead, in what would be better again than switching twice a year. Even if we switched once, we said, okay, this is it. We're sticking in this time. That would be better than the flopping back and forth. Right. That's what kills me because again, it literally hurts people to do this. It disrupts their day, disrupts their sleep schedules, disrupts their ability to work effectively, and causes more traffic accidents. There's all sorts of negative consequences to this of government policy, and most of the time, people can't even remember why we're doing it anymore. We don't understand like what the reasoning was, and it had to do with it's nothing really to do with farmers. It has to do more with like fuel savings related to stuff that went on in World War I. Kind of stuck around as a way to like save power, save fuel, things like that. But it doesn't accomplish the goals that it says it's going to do. At this point in time, the only couple reasons to stick to doing the clock change twice a year is A, momentum, is tradition at this point. It's just what we do. And B, there is some lobbying, right? Like there's uh retailers think that having later hours where it's sunny out makes people more likely to buy. So more hours where it's sunny out, more hours to be out doing things where it's sunny and 9 p.m. out, people are people are more likely to buy stuff. So there's some level of lobbying going on. But again, I don't understand. Listen, members of Congress, and actually members of New York State delegation too, members of the New York State legislature, y'all can change this. Like Arizona, they just decided they ain't doing it. They just said, nope, we aren't participating in this. And you know what? They're fine. We all seem to be able to communicate with Arizona. Listen, for my job, I have to communicate with people across time zones all the time. We could just opt out as a state. We get used to it. It's fine. People would adapt. You don't think people are going to get used to New York City time all across the world, all across the United States? If New York State just says, no, we're just going to stop doing that. We're gonna freeze in standard time or freeze in daylight savings time. This is the last clock change you're doing. Boom. Honestly, I think it'd be great. Kathy Hochul should do it. That it won't make me fully like her, but it will boost my perception of her just a little bit. And I know that Andrew Cuomo is goodness, it makes me sick saying this. Andrew Cuomo is catching up in the polls. He was up in the 30% for the primary. I don't know if that's going to stick. That bums me out. I'm sure that's something Larry and Tim will talk about this week, but oof. I don't want to see that. Anyway, back to daylight savings time. Um, we should abolish it. And there's no reason for the government to keep manipulating our clocks. I know they set standard times. I know there's someone out there going, Kevin. Well, of course the government sets time. If the government didn't set the time, we wouldn't all agree in the Eastern time zone that it is 12:10 right now. When the show is going out live. Well, yeah, I know that. I know why we standardized time. I know why it didn't make sense to have, sundials because of trains going back when you can't have like a train that like is moving along and, one station says it's 12:15 and another station says it's 12:30 and you have instant communication. Now, you got to set the time standards. I get it. That being said, we don't have to switch the clocks twice a year. There's no reason for it. There's no longer any um there's no longer any good reason, if there ever was one, to continue switching the clocks back and forth. And all it does is disrupt our sleep cycles, make people more tired, especially in the spring forward one. Again, spring forward is not as bad. My son woke up at a decent time. Luckily, wanted to sleep in a little bit more. We had to wake him up a little bit earlier than he wanted. I woke up a little bit earlier than I wanted. I'm tired today, of course. Not as bad as the fall one for the baby though. The baby didn't get like why the time is switched, why the food is switched. The dogs don't get it. The animals don't get it either. They're fine with getting their meal a little bit early. They are not fine with getting their meal a little bit late. And you know, and that's it's not something that we need to do anymore. All right, so that's my rant on that. I know I do this twice a year, but I'm gonna keep on it until every year until we switch to sticking with one either standard time or daylight savings time. Either way, I'd be fine with either way. I think I'm more on the standard time side, but either way is fine. But we do have a bunch of other stuff to talk about today too. Stuff that's and this is a serious issue. I want to dismiss the seriousness of this issue, but there are other like serious kind of international issues that we can talk about, state issues, things like that. I wanted to make sure that we talked about. There's a story going around, especially in a lot of kind of conservative libertarian circles, about this biolab situation in Ukraine. So I want to talk about that, because it's stuff that it's tough to sort through, right? There's a lot of conflicting information out there. So I wanted to come in and I've been reading about this all weekend, reading kind of both sides of this and try to sort through what information is available to help make a good decision on this. And I'll post some links to some stuff. If you're listening to the online show, I did get that up. If you listen to the online show, I'll post some links to that. If you listen to the radio show, make sure you go follow us at Free Solution on Facebook, Free Solution on YouTube, and you can check out the links there because there's a story that came out from Glenn Greenwald. He's talking about that. And then you got the Russians and the Chinese talking about how this biolabs in Ukraine, that they're funded by the U.S. government, funded by the Department of Defense. Okay, is there any truth to that? They're saying that they're trying to destroy evidence. Well, what evidence is it that they're destroying? Is this something that normally happens in this process? And yeah, and on top of that, again, I want to talk about the stuff going on with Facebook. It's interesting because they've decided to switch their policy about advocating for violence and allow you to make non-specific threats against Russian invaders. So whether or not that's a good thing, whether that makes sense, if we get to it too, I do want to talk about some local issues if I can. The violence in Rochester continuing to be an issue, and what some potential solutions are to that. And also back on the Ukraine thing too, some more solutions to that situation. Because again, I really appreciate the calls that I got last Monday. You guys are amazing. Love when I hear from you guys. Again, give us a call, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000 if you'd like to participate in the show. But I didn't get to talk about as many solutions I want to. I want to make sure that like we talk about ways in which it's not just the government, it's not just military invention that can go and help people and ease conflict in these places. Thanks again for joining us on Free Solution. Again, give us a call, 585-346-3000 if you want to participate. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. Yeah. It seems to be going through, which surprised me. I think I'm still live at here. Yeah, so I bet the people online right now are hearing me talking, but they're not hearing you talk. So, guys who are listening online, I'm talking to my producer Bob, and because all I did was run into a computer issue. Normally, I feed you guys the program where you would hear the music and you hear the ads and you'd hear the callers. Guys, if someone calls in, you're not going to be able to hear the caller, unfortunately. It's just I wanted to get a stream out. And I wasn't able to do it because of a computer issue that I just discovered. So, Uh, yes, because. All right. Yeah, John, we're gonna talk about this for sure. Learn about seasonal affective disorder. The government created SAD. And Shelly, this stuff is wild. I haven't seen YouTube commercials around this yet, but holy cow. Saying that Andrew Cuomo was slandered. I saw him speaking at the church. Yikes. Yeah. You folks listening online, I'll try to I'll try to be entertaining during the breaks. But a lot of times I'm like just looking up research for the next part of my show, so bear with me a bit. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson, your host today. Thanks again for joining us on this wonderful, wonderful Monday. Appreciate y'all being here. And yeah, again, we're talking about what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the biolab situation in Ukraine, and whether or not that is Russian and Chinese propaganda, right? And we got a comment already when I had mentioned this from John Harold, and he says yes, because they can justify the invasion, and that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Again, there's enough there to have things look a bit strange. I get it, depending on how generously or not generously you want to read some of the stories associated with it, right? So, we have where this started to come out from, right? Is again we had Russia started to say we think that there are U.S. biolab facilities in Ukraine, and we suspect that uh, the Ukrainians and U.S. government are going to unleash a biological attack. That was an accusation got made before this story kind of really came out, and that kind of made U.S. intelligence, U.S. State Department, and whatnot, military say like, well, okay, that means that the Russians are probably going to do this. They're planning a false flag attack, which I might have been skeptical of that like a month ago. I was, maybe not so much now. And so part of me is like, all right, well, this might be what's happening, right? There's a false flag attack, and kind of to John's point online, they're also trying to find ways to justify the invasion, right? Like they said, they're going to denazify the country. They're saying that Ukraine presented an actual threat to Russian security. I mean, just thinking about NATO represents an actual threat to Russian security, and this would be, the smoking gun to prove that. I'm skeptical of such accusations generally. I mean, again, we saw what happened with Iraq. The weapons of mass destruction thing that turned out to not quite be as real and legitimate of a threat as it was presented as by people like Colin Powell and George Bush. And we we ended up getting involved in this costly war, and a bunch of these folks who are making these claims, repeating these claims, are also skeptical of what happened in Iraq, and as they should be. But now we have this kind of repetition of these claims made by the Russian and Chinese governments. So well, let's talk about like what the kind of semi-legitimate evidence is, right? Like the stuff people are talking about now. There's this article that came out from Glenn Greenwald. I'll share it. You can read it. He made a whole video on the thing too. Um, here, no, because again, I want you to be able to read this stuff. I read it, and there's a woman named Victoria Newland who said that Ukraine has biological research facilities, and that she's worried that Russia is going to seize them. Right? Uh, she's in a discussion with Senator Marco Rubio, and Marco Rubio says, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons? And she, instead of just saying like, no, of course not, whatever, she ends up saying, kind of waffling a bit, giving a weird answer, and saying that like, well, there are biological research facilities, and she what they're if I'm giving a generous interpretation of this, right? What they're worried about is that they have research facilities that are doing research on dangerous pathogens, right? Like either for like pandemic outbreak research, or other things like that, research on combating things like, and I don't know like to what extent any individual lab is, level 1 through 4. There's different levels of seriousness. We kind of talked about this with like the Wuhan lab stuff. And so there's some places that are doing stuff in the same way that the Wuhan lab was doing research. And there's a worry that if that one of those facilities is overtaken by Russian troops, the US and the Ukrainians worry that that could either lead to an accidental spread of a serious disease if it's one of those facilities and they don't correctly purge the research that they're working on, right? Like the actual samples, or worse, that the Russians overtake these facilities, capture that research intact, and then are able to use that to either actually use biological warfare or accuse the Ukrainians of doing such, right? So that's kind of where the gem of possible legitimacy comes from, right? Again, I posted the Glenn Greenwald article. You can read that. I'm going to post something else in a few minutes too. Um, but I want to get to this question first. Shelley says the media hasn't been honest in years, so why should we believe them now? Uh, my answer to that is like I don't necessarily think you should believe or not believe any particular set of media, right? Like Washington Post and RT have conflicting, stories on this stuff, right? RT is Russian state-owned propaganda. Like that is what it is. Sometimes they say things that happen to be true, or they give good criticism of U.S. government policy, but it's a state-owned Russian television network. That's what it is. Um, so Shelley, it's not a matter of like we should automatically not believe whatever the media says, because sometimes what the media says is right, sometimes it's not. And if anything, like again, I'm in a way the media too, right? It's a matter of trying to look through the actual evidence and discerning what the truth and the threat is, and whether or not people are being manipulated. In this case, I lean slightly towards Russia is trying to manipulate folks into creating a justification for their war. It might be true. I leave open the fact that I could be totally wrong about this. I don't know, but I lean towards this is probably not true. And the biological research labs aren't necessarily something that is made and operated for the purposes of weaponizing dangerous pathogens. So could be totally wrong about this. The U.S. government has dabbled in a little bit of that before, or at least plausibly. Um, and yeah, that's stuff that's it's really really ugly stuff. And we should stay away from that. Again, there's a long history of not specifically just the American government, but all governments like weaponizing disease, and that's an ugly thing that we now have conventions and international laws against, and hopefully that's not something that ever uh, rears its head. And kind of to Shelley's other point, again, someone listening on our YouTube channel, Marco Rubio fettered the answer by asking if it'd be Russ's fault if something were to happen. Yeah, no, he kind of let it, Marco Rubio was, I think, a little bit thrown off by the fact that she didn't just say, no, of course not. They're not doing like weapons research or chemical research in that way. She gave a straightforward answer. I think if I'm being generous about it, and I don't necessarily have to be generous, but if I were being generous, you could say she wanted to clarify that there is an actual threat here because they're doing research on dangerous pathogens, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily doing so with the intent to use them as weapons. Now, again, folks are skeptical of that. They look at that answer and they say, well, see, she didn't deny it. She's telling the truth. And you got Chinese propagandists out here, and again, talking about how they're purging all these documents. They're, the DoD is funding all these places, and we don't know. And you got to kind of read through their propaganda too. And again, to follow up on another comment that Shelley online says, I lean the same way, but cannot prove it because of media disinformation. Again, you gotta look at, like, I can't assume that just because someone's taking the opposite argument of American media that they are also telling the truth. Again, I don't trust the Russian media or Chinese state media. I don't necessarily automatically trust independent journalists like Glenn Greenwald too. He did some great reporting around the Edward Snowden stuff, but it doesn't mean he's always right about this stuff either. He could be wrong about things, and it's incumbent upon him to be able to prove it with solid evidence and make good arguments if he's going to make a bold accusation like that, right? That the U.S. is funding biological research. Hopefully he digs through, and hopefully he finds nothing. But if he does, I'll be reading it, I'll be sharing it, and yeah, I'll say I was wrong about this stuff. Actually, and I do want, since I only have like a minute left, I may have been wrong. Like, we threw out the idea that probably the coronavirus came from the Wuhan lab. Like, now there's other evidence to say maybe that was wrong too. So I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm just trying to read through what makes sense and how average folks like us can think about policy and advocating to our members of Congress in ways to keep us safe, to prevent our tax dollars from going to dangerous gain of function research over there. And that was my kind of criticism and take on those things. But when we come back, we'll keep talking about this biolab thing, and then we'll talk about some solutions, some Facebook news, maybe some local stuff too. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. Give us a call if you want to participate in the show, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. Folks listening online, I know you can't hear music. It's transition music. So thanks for sticking with us today. Again, love the comments. Gene, we'll get to that one. Shelley, your other one too. Both important things to chat about for sure. And as soon as my computer cooperates with me, I will share those comments. Folks, I have too many tabs open. That is my vice. That's my bad habit. I've got like 40 tabs open right now, and my computer does not like it. That is not the reason why I screwed up the live stream, though. That's a totally unrelated thing that is not really my fault, other than the fact I should have checked it sooner. can't make the assumption that my computer's going to be working fine. Okay. I'm being quiet, folks, because I'm doing research. I'm about to post a link to what I'm going to talk about next segment. Sorry for the quietness. Appreciate y'all sticking with us throughout this, though. Come on. Go. well, in like the Baltic states, who works on this stuff and is talking about what's going on here. Like, take it for what it is, right? I can't totally verify everything this person says, but it gives an explanation for how biolabs work, what they are. You know, we I know I got a comment from Shelly online too. Said Wadworth Labs works in biological science all the time. Doesn't mean they're making weapons. There's I don't know that lab in particular, but there's labs, dozens of labs in Rochester that work on stuff related to this. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're using it for something nefarious. Like a lot of times that research is exactly what these institutions say they are. It's research to figure out different ways to develop vaccines. It's research to figure out what genes within a virus make someone sick. It's research to figure out, what things can kill these viruses or bacteria that can cause deadly human infections, right? And so you need to have those dangerous pathogens around in order to figure out the best way to fight them. And there's different levels of containment surrounding that, right? I think again levels 1 through 4. The tweet thread that I posted about discusses some of that, and there's also a discussion in that thread about some of the protocols associated with it too. So again, just because a biolab exists, it doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily nefarious about it. Could be, but doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. And there's evidence. There's documentation. That Glenn Greenwald points out that there's samples being destroyed, and that was kind of presented as a way to cover up what was going on in these places. But again, that's not necessarily the case either. There's regular destruction of samples to do this, and the evidence that he had pointed to is really more associated with kind of routine, like we're done with an experiment on this sample and we have to purge it, and someone has to verify that that sample was purged correctly, because if you have a dangerous pathogen, you don't want to just toss it in the garbage with everything else. You want to make sure that that is destroyed, that it's dead, that it's not going to get out. And I see comments online talking about how I have not done any research in this. Supposedly, like Lyme disease had escaped from a lab, and it might have been a bio. I don't know about that. But some of this stuff does happen, right? And it happened from there's a very, very nasty flu strain that went around in the 50s that escaped from a Soviet lab in Russia. And again, these labs exist all over the place, not just in Ukraine, but of course all over the US. China has some, Russia has some. In the Ukrainian labs, they were getting samples of some of these dangerous pathogens from Russia. They were ordering them from Russian labs to be able to do their research on. And again, if you look through that thread, if you're listening on the radio, I'm sorry you can't see it, but if you're listening on the radio, check out the thread that I posted to the Free Solution Facebook page, Free Solution YouTube channel, the Kevin Wilson page, any one of those. You'll be able to read through this. Is again something translated from Russian from someone who does research in this area, and it strikes me as plausible, right, that the evidence presented so far by the Russian and Chinese governments don't necessarily lead you to conclude fully, don't lead me to conclude fully that there is something nefarious going on here. And that both the Russians and Ukrainians have good reason to be worried about the safety and security of those labs, and that making sure that any research is secure there is probably really important. Because again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a nefarious thing on the part of the Russians either. They could go in and they're just doing, you know, research on whatever in this place. Polio, they're doing research on, coronavirus, whatever, and they can inadvertently cause an outbreak. And yeah. Brian Sutton says, as a signatory to Geneva Conventions, we are prevented from even researching biological weapons. It's reasonable to assume that the U.S. funding labs in countries that are not signatories is a way around this restriction. As I understood it, that the Ukrainians were also signatories on this, and the U.S. does do stuff like this all the time, right? not all the time. It is more common than it should be. Not necessarily with this, but like with our human rights protections, right? So what do we do with people accused of terrorism uh around the world, right? We send them to Gitmo, where the human rights protections don't necessarily apply as much, or even though that is a U.S. controlled base in Cuba, or we'll send them to a another country altogether, where they can do terrible things that we would never legally be allowed to do in the US, and there's some level of plausible deniability with getting around those human rights restrictions that we have both as the US government and as signatories to things like the Geneva Convention. Unfortunately, that's something that happens. Again, and that's why I'm not fully dismissing this story because I think accusations like this should be taken seriously. I think that there's there's enough worry about what uh, Miss Newland said to say like, well, we should that we should look into it, right? Like, and I appreciate folks like Glenn Greenwald looking into it. I would appreciate more, folks. I'd also appreciate too folks being skeptical of this, right? Again, don't believe everything that comes out of the Russians and the Chinese. I don't know why I should have to say that to some libertarians, but those guys are not great. Those government, not the whole people, but those governments are not great. The, the Chinese Communist government may not have your best interest in mind. They may not be like telling the truth because they can if they can spread a credible lie that undermines US hegemony, that benefits them. They can undermine US cultural power in the world and make us look like hypocrites on human rights and, Geneva Convention issues. Of course they're going to spread that. Why wouldn't they? It only increases their legitimacy, and when they break the rules, which they are, they can just say, "Hey, what about the US? They did it too." I mean, that's what like half this invasion has been. What about the US? What about the US in this place too? Russian media says. What about the U.S. in Iraq? What about the U.S. in sending weapons to Yemen? Yeah, no, I get it. Those are bad things too. It doesn't mean that these other countries get a free pass to also abuse human rights, start wars of aggression, or do other terrible things to folks to commit war crimes. They don't get a free pass for that stuff, and I don't think they should. And it's perfectly reasonable to criticize both these governments and their propaganda, and the folks in the U.S. who are kind of being less critical than they ought to be with this stuff. Because again, these folks have a sharp mind for seeing the propaganda in U.S. media, but if you're ignoring it in the Russian and Chinese media, you're doing something wrong here. Sorry, that's the way it is. You gotta you gotta do you gotta do both. And yeah, I've been following this too. Brian Sutton says, it's interesting to see what the India media is saying. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different kind of powers operating and jockeying for that position and discussion around this stuff. The Indian media seems to be, I don't know, I can't tell what to make of it, and I haven't done a deep enough study of this other than seeing several clips around promoting that, and I can't help but wonder why that is. If it's are they getting funding to promote this stuff, to kind of promote these types of stories, or what? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Surprisingly, somehow, guys, I don't have all the answers. I know that may shock some of you. Not really. I don't. Don't pretend I do. I don't know everything. I'm just some guy on a radio. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. Again, if you want to participate in the show, give us a call, 585-346-3000. That's 585-346-3000. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. There you go, Brian. Potch, be careful about calling the kettle black. Get it? And I never got to, man, I never got to Gene's comments. We'll see if I can get to that. We'll definitely talk about that. Talk about the solutions. And I know, Bob, it's weird. I'm not talking to you. Whatever. Yeah, y'all listen online right now. You let me know if we can give you that bonus content in between. Here, if you guys have stuff to say in the break, might do more of this because I think I may have lost my other computer, so I'm gonna have to find a new setup that works anyway. All right. Yeah, it could be too. Yeah, I'm gonna ask the IT support. Be like, y'all wipe my thing because I still got some of the programs here. Just all my files, all my OBS stuff. Ah, so annoying. Oh man. All right, welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today. Thanks again for joining us here on WYSL, here on WACK if you're listening a little bit later, and of course, our friends listening online too. Thanks again for being here. And thanks to my online audience for sticking with us through all the glitches today. I want to get to a comment that was actually left before the last segment too. Gene says, last night in the news, I heard Biden say that we will not be sending troops to fight Russia and Ukraine. He did not say he wouldn't send troops to fight Russia and Poland. That is true. And we, in fact, have troops in Poland right now because Poland is a NATO country. And if Russia decides to attack Poland, because they're a NATO country, they're Article 5 of the kind of NATO treaty, NATO alliance says that when you attack one country, you attack all of them. So the United States has committed itself to defend that country, in addition to several other countries like some of the Baltic countries and whatnot as well. So yeah, any attack that Russia does on Poland, the U.S. will likely defend. We'll see. And if they don't, then NATO is completely obliterated as an organization. Any credibility the U.S. has in making alliances is completely gone. And then that's a tough decision to make because any response to Russian aggression could lead to a nuclear conflict, could lead to the U.S. getting involved in the war. That's why the U.S. isn't sending troops to Ukraine. That's why the U.S. is even skeptical of doing that thing where they're going to send F-16s to Poland and have Poland send their MiGs to Ukraine so they can try to contest the airspace over there. And the U.S. military correctly, I think, is worried that sort of escalation would lead to some sort of escalation on the part of Russia too. and I don't want the U.S. to get involved in the war. I think, to be honest, Joe Biden has been relatively prudent in keeping the U.S. out of this conflict. We'll see if he sticks to that. But so far, he's been pretty forthright in saying that we should not get involved in this conflict in any direct way. And yeah, so I hope that keeps happening. At the same time, again, if Russia is the one who attacks, they're the ones who have started the escalation. They know the consequences of attacking a defensive alliance like NATO, and how the U.S. and other countries are going to respond. So that's sort of on them too. But hopefully, it doesn't get to that point. We're unfortunately getting close with the Russians trying to target supply convoys heading in from Poland to air bases and or other bases in Ukraine. They said they're targeting that. There's a missile strike that happened over there in western Ukraine that killed like 35 people. So they're trying to disrupt the foreign flow of goods and weapons and supplies to the Ukrainian army. And that's like 12 miles from the Polish border. So yeah, I mean, there's a possibility that the conflict kicks off because of killing folks who are trying to get supplies in, or missiles and shots going a little bit too far, a little bit too close to the border. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And Gene says, I'm already against the next war. Yeah, me too, Gene. Don't think we should get involved in this. And again, I'm not cheering for the U.S. to get involved in response to an attack on NATO. I just understand that that's what's going to happen. And that's realistic. I don't think telling you what's realistically going to happen is cheering for the war. So hopefully it does not come to that. And so I want to talk about like a couple other things before we go, though. I want to talk about this. So Facebook has now said that you can make non-specific threats against people in response to an invasion. And so basically on Facebook, you're able to say, like death to Russian invaders or something like that, right? Now, normally you say something like that and they'll flag it as advocating violence and they'll shut down your account, right? So they've made this exception in this conflict for this issue. No one can go and say anything specific. Like you can't say, I want a specific person to die, to be harmed, etc. But you can say death to Russian invaders, apparently. And it'll be interesting to see if they apply that consistently throughout the world. Again, is what happens in the Israeli-Palestine conflict? Can you make non-specific threats against Israel or Palestine on Facebook? Can you make non-specific threats against other countries, against the U.S.? If the U.S. is doing a military operation or supporting a military operation somewhere, if someone's using Facebook in Yemen, can they say that? I don't know. Again, and Yemen being, of course, a country that is being bombed and blockaded, and there's just horrible stuff going on there, all at the hands of the Saudi government, and the United States government is supplying that. The Saudi government being, of course, the same ones who executed 81 people yesterday. I think a world record in modern times. So 81 executions yesterday, and the Biden administration wants to buy more oil from them and from Venezuela. Not sure I like that either. I get trying to find new supplies while the U.S. Resources ramp up. For some reason, it was slowed down or not able to meet the current demand. And yeah, we might be trying to get more stuff from the Saudis who are funding this other horrific war that we absolutely should care about, and the Venezuelan government, who are the Maduro regime is oppressing his people and making it difficult for people to make a living, to leave, to have freedom in that country too. And we may be going back to that. So I don't know fully what the answer is, other than trying to find ways where we don't have to be dependent on these other countries Russia, Venezuela, Iran, which that might be over, Saudi Arabia, all these other countries that have these oil resources. We're funding nasty stuff that by being a part of that. And there's like collectively, not just, I don't mean the US government, but we collectively need to find a way to knock that off. And Gene says, supposedly NATO was formed to prevent World War III. It seems that NATO could be the cause of World War III. Maybe. I mean, again, kind of depends on how far down the rabbit hole you go, who caused what and when. If NATO is responding to, a threat, is that legitimate? I totally get why some of these countries around Russia want to be a part of NATO. They think that, correctly or incorrectly, they think that being a part of an alliance and triggering an overwhelming response from Western Europe and the US would prevent a Russian invasion. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I totally get it. I get why Ukraine wants to do that, given how the Russian government has acted with them for the last, well, since 2014. Some of the other countries, Georgia, wanting to join. Yeah, I get it. The Russians invaded there. They took action there. But yeah, I don't know it so much as the cause. It could be causing it in the same way that the alliances of the previous war. Once that system of alliances kicked into place, things really spiral out of control. And it's imperative that our political leaders, because unfortunately it's not just us, but it's imperative that our political leaders do whatever they can to stop that from happening, to prevent the war from getting out of control, while also not letting bullies like Putin get away with everything. We have to hope and pray that we have the leadership to do both. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. Of course, I am out again this Wednesday. We're going to have Craig in, then Larry Sharpin tomorrow, and I will be back on Friday. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Talk to you then.